Imagine waking up to the sound of rain hitting your roof. You glance outside. The streets are wet, the sky is gray. Your plans can wait until tomorrow. Now imagine tomorrow arrives, and the rain never stopped. A third day passes, then a fourth. By the end of the week, your clothes are soaked, your food is running low, and every piece of wood around you feels damp. Today, that sounds inconvenient. 20,000 years ago, it could decide whether you lived or died. For prehistoric hunter-gatherers, rain wasn't just weather. It changed almost every part of daily life. Hunting became harder. Fire became fragile. Rivers swelled. Trails disappeared beneath mud. Even finding a dry place to sleep became a challenge. Yet humans survived these conditions for hundreds of thousands of years. In fact, some archaeologists believe that learning to endure long periods of bad weather helped shape the very behaviors that make us human today. Because when you couldn't simply wait for the storm to end, you had to solve problems, and those solutions still echo inside your life. By the end of this video, you'll see that a rainy week wasn't just something ancient humans endured. It may have quietly influenced how we cooperate, plan ahead, and even think about the future. Around 23,000 years ago, on the shores of what is now the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel, a group of hunter-gatherers built something remarkable. The site is known as Ohalo II. It was discovered after the water level of the lake dropped during a severe drought in 1989, exposing an archaeological site that had remained hidden beneath the water for thousands of years. What researchers found there surprised almost everyone. Instead of scattered traces of people passing through, they uncovered the remains of 6 oval brush huts, carefully arranged around open activity areas. Inside those huts were fireplaces, grinding stones, flint tools, animal bones, more than 150 species of plant remains, even fragments of woven fibers. Most astonishing of all, archaeologists discovered preserved bedding made from grasses and other plants. It is one of the oldest known examples of humans deliberately creating sleeping spaces. None of this should have survived. Normally, wood, grass, and plant fibers decay within years, but the rising waters of the Sea of Galilee sealed the site beneath layers of mud, creating an oxygen-poor environment that preserved extraordinary details for over 20,000 years. The excavation, led by archaeologist Danny Nadell from the University of Haifa, revealed something important. These people weren't simply wandering from place to place every day. They invested time in building shelters strong enough to withstand changing weather. That matters because rain changes everything. When heavy rain continues for days, your body loses heat much faster. Even at temperatures above freezing, wet clothing can increase heat loss dramatically. Modern survival studies show that cold rain combined with wind can lower your core body temperature far faster than dry air at the same temperature. Ancient humans understood this long before thermometers existed. They didn't need scientific measurements. They had experience. A poorly built shelter meant damp bedding. Damp bedding meant poor sleep. Poor sleep reduced alertness. Reduced alertness made hunting more dangerous. 1 week of rain could create problems that lasted much longer than the storm itself. So instead of relying on luck, many groups built temporary homes designed to shed water. Branches formed the frame. Reeds and grasses were layered across the roof. Animal hides may have added another protective layer in colder regions. The goal wasn't luxury. It was staying dry enough to survive. The surprising part is that these shelters were rarely permanent. Hunter-gatherers often moved with the seasons, following migrating animals and edible plants. But mobility didn't mean carelessness. Wherever they stopped, they created small environments that reduced risk. Every branch placed on a roof represented time invested against uncertainty. Every sleeping area represented planning. And planning is expensive. You only plan when you believe tomorrow matters. For decades, anthropologists assumed prehistoric humans mostly reacted to whatever happened around them. Sites like Ohalo II tell a different story. These people anticipated problems before they arrived. Rain wasn't an unexpected disaster. It was a recurring challenge, so they prepared for it. But shelter alone couldn't solve the biggest problem of all. Because even the strongest hut becomes useless once something far more valuable disappears: fire. And during a week of relentless rain, keeping a single flame alive may have become the most important job in the entire camp. Fire is so common today that you almost never think about losing it. If your stove goes out, you press a button. If your lights fail, electricity usually returns within hours. For ancient humans, there was no backup. A single fire often meant warmth, cooked food, clean water, protection from predators, light after sunset, and a place where the entire group gathered. Losing it during a week of rain could be catastrophic. Evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggests humans were using controlled fire nearly 1 million years ago. In 2012, archaeologist Francesco Berna and colleagues analyzed microscopic ash and burned bone deep inside the cave. The remains were too far from the entrance to have been carried there by natural wildfires. The fire had been made and maintained by humans. That discovery changed how researchers viewed our ancestors. Fire was no longer just an occasional tool. It had become something people depended on. But dependence creates vulnerability. Rain attacks fire from every direction. Wood absorbs moisture. Smoke becomes thicker. Flames burn lower. The smallest mistake can extinguish hours or even days of careful work. So prehistoric people developed a different strategy. Instead of constantly creating new fires, they focused on protecting the ones they already had. Archaeologists repeatedly find hearths positioned in sheltered parts of caves and beneath rock overhangs, where wind and rain had less impact. At sites like Classy's River Caves in South Africa, occupied as early as 120,000 years ago, generations returned to similar protected locations, rebuilding hearths in nearly the same places. That wasn't random. It suggests people understood how geography could protect one of their most valuable resources. A fire wasn't simply lit. It was managed. Large logs were burned slowly. Dense hardwoods produced long-lasting coals. Ash acted like insulation, allowing embers to survive for hours beneath the surface. Modern survival experts still use this technique today. A fire doesn't need bright flames to stay alive. Sometimes all it needs is a few glowing coals hidden beneath warm ash. Some anthropologists believe hunter-gatherers may even have transported embers from one campsite to another, inside bark containers, large shells, or bundles of damp moss. While direct archaeological evidence is rare because organic materials decay quickly, many historically documented hunter-gatherer societies carried fire rather than risk creating it from scratch each day, because making fire was never guaranteed. Before matches, a single spark required dry tinder, suitable wood, and considerable skill. After days of rain, all three became harder to find. Protecting yesterday's fire was often easier than making tomorrow's. But fire wasn't only about survival. It transformed the camp itself. During long stretches of bad weather, outdoor activity slowed. People gathered closer together around the hearth. Stone tools were repaired. Spears were reshaped. Animal hides were scraped and softened. Children watched adults work. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next, not through books, but through observation. Some researchers argue that these quiet hours around shared fires helped strengthen language and social learning. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham of Harvard University has argued that controlled fire fundamentally reshaped human evolution by changing how we ate, socialized, and spent our evenings. Rain may have kept people inside. Fire gave them a reason to stay together. But even if the fire survived, another problem slowly grew outside the shelter. Food. After several days of continuous rain, familiar hunting routes disappeared beneath mud. Animals changed their behavior. Some migrated, others remained hidden. A successful hunt became much less predictable. For a family living meal to meal, uncertainty quickly became hunger. Yet archaeology suggests ancient humans rarely depended on a single source of food. At Ohalo II, researchers recovered tens of thousands of plant remains, including wild barley, oats, fruits, nuts, and edible seeds. They also found fish bones, bird remains, tortoise shells, and the bones of small mammals. This wasn't the diet of people waiting for one lucky hunt. It was the diet of skilled opportunists. Rain changed what was available. So they adapted. Streams swollen by rainfall often trapped fish in shallow pools. Wet forests produced mushrooms and fresh plant growth. Snails, frogs, and shellfish became easier to collect in some environments. Large game became harder to track. Small foods became more valuable. Modern hunter-gatherer groups such as the Hadza of Tanzania still demonstrate this flexibility. Anthropologists have documented how they regularly shift between different food sources depending on seasonal conditions rather than relying on one predictable resource. The lesson appears throughout the archaeological record. The groups most likely to survive were not always the strongest hunters. They were often the most adaptable foragers. But adaptability demanded something else. Because sometimes the smartest decision during endless rain wasn't to keep searching. It was to stay exactly where you were and use the time for something far more important. Waiting sounds passive, but for prehistoric humans, waiting could be one of the most productive things they did. When heavy rain made long journeys dangerous, the camp didn't simply fall silent. It shifted. Archaeologists see this pattern again and again. Places that served as temporary homes often contain clusters of stone flakes, broken spear points, animal hides, grinding stones, and carefully maintained hearths. These weren't signs of inactivity. They were evidence of maintenance. The tools that failed during the last hunt had to be repaired before the next one. The hides soaked by rain had to be dried and softened. Food that remained had to be carefully divided. Children had to be watched. And perhaps most importantly, knowledge had to be passed on. Unlike most animals, humans are born with remarkably little practical survival knowledge. A newborn deer can stand within hours. A human child may need more than a decade to become an effective hunter or gatherer. That long childhood is one of our species' defining traits. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy has argued that human survival depended not only on parents, but on entire communities raising children together. During periods when bad weather kept people close to camp, children had more opportunities to observe adults making tools, preparing food, repairing shelters, and solving problems. Every rainy day became a classroom. No writing, no schools, just careful observation repeated thousands of times. Stone tools tell the same story. At sites across Europe and Africa, archaeologists find evidence that techniques for shaping stone remained remarkably consistent across generations. Some hand-axe traditions persisted for hundreds of thousands of years, suggesting that knowledge was taught with extraordinary precision. That level of cultural continuity doesn't happen by accident. It requires time. It requires attention. And it requires people spending long hours together. Rain may have slowed movement. It accelerated learning. But weather also affected something much larger than a single campsite. It shaped entire landscapes. Around 11,700 years ago, the last ice age came to an end. Rainfall patterns shifted across much of the world. Some regions became greener. Others became drier. Lakes expanded. Rivers changed course. Forests spread into places that had once been open grasslands. Groups that understood these changes found new opportunities. Those that failed to adapt disappeared from the archaeological record. Researchers studying pollen preserved in ancient lake sediments can reconstruct these environmental changes with remarkable accuracy. Tiny grains trapped in mud reveal which plants dominated an area thousands of years ago, allowing scientists to estimate rainfall, temperature, and seasonal conditions. The story they tell is clear. Ancient humans weren't surviving in a static world. The environment was constantly changing. Rain one year could become drought the next. Flexibility wasn't an advantage. It was a necessity. And perhaps that's the most surprising part. We often imagine prehistoric people as constantly reacting to nature, but archaeology paints a different picture. They anticipated seasons. They chose campsites with shelter. They protected their fire before the storm arrived. They gathered different foods when conditions changed. They repaired tools before they broke completely. They invested in one another. Not because life was easy, because uncertainty was normal. That way of thinking still lives inside you. You stock food before a storm. You charge your phone before the power goes out. You check tomorrow's forecast before leaving home. These habits feel modern. In reality, they are ancient. The technology has changed. The instinct has not. The next time you hear rain outside your window, it probably means canceled plans, slower traffic, or a quiet evening indoors. 20,000 years ago, the same sound carried a different meaning. It reminded you to protect the fire, to repair your tools, to stay close to the people who kept you alive, and to prepare for whatever came after the clouds finally cleared. Because for ancient humans, survival was never about defeating nature. It was about learning to live with it. And in many ways, that's exactly what you're still doing today.